Okay, so first question, please introduce yourself and explain why you are a candidate for the Oakland School Board.
Yeah. Hi, I am Kyra Mungia. Um, my dad and his two brothers grew up as mixed kids before it was as common today as it is to be mixed. Half Mexican and half Japanese, they were often made fun of for being different, whether it was the way they looked, the food they ate, the clothes they wore. Neither of their parents, my grandparents, had more than a middle school education, and they were both first generation immigrants. So my dad and uncles were left to navigate the public school system themselves. My dad wasn't any smarter or harder working than his two brothers, though he would beg to differ. He would also say he's funnier, more handsome, and the like. But somehow he got lucky. He found teachers who took interest in him, who believed in and pushed him. He got in the right classes and in the right place at the right time. My dad ended up being first gen college student and the only one in his family to go on to get an advanced degree. His brothers didn't fare as well academically or ultimately professionally, but again, that's not because of any failure on their part, but rather the systems. Luck isn't something that someone should have to count on to be successful, yet so many of our families do. Luck is something that can be passed down from generation to generation, just as unluck can. I'm grateful that my dad was able to pass his luck down to me, and he also passed down his love for learning, which is ultimately what led me to become an OUSD teacher and now a candidate for school board in District 6. Because no family should have to rely on luck to receive a quality education for their child. I'm running to represent District 6 on the school board because we have an opportunity to change that and eliminate the barriers that are holding so many families back so that everyone can be successful. I'll pause there. Yeah, you're right. It's really hard to see the timer because it goes into your background. I'm gonna I didn't set it up on my phone. Is that okay if I do it on my phone now?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that.
Thank you. No, I didn't. I was like, oh, I'm gonna be able to see it, but you were right. I should have believed you.
And when you are ready, then
I'm good.
Our second question is, what current programs and proposals do you feel are successful? What would you keep and build on? What would you cut?
Yeah. First, we would have to define the metric. And for me, the metric is ultimately what's improving outcomes for our kids. As we've seen in OUSD, that looks like access to quality educators and educators who look like our students. That means engaging curriculum and rigorous instruction for our students, to name a few things. Some examples specifically of programs that are working for our students include the linked learning work that has helped increase graduation rates overall and reduce disparities and equity gaps within them. Our community schools that meet the needs of the whole child. The Office of Equity that supports our Black, Latinx, and API students to continue to reduce those racial disparities that we see. OUSD's Grow Your Own Teacher Pipelines, because we know the best teachers for our kids are those who reflect the diversity of Oakland and share their lived experiences. And while newer, the literacy work is incredibly promising. So those are a few. I'm sure that there are others that I'm forgetting as well. And in a perfect universe, we wouldn't have to cut anything. These wouldn't be the conversations we'd be having. The bottom line is, though, that without a budget that is sustainable for the long term, we cannot improve Oakland's education system. OEA Executive Director John Green, at a meeting that I was at recently, pointed out how Oakland has about half the ADA as a district like Fresno, but pays double the amount in workers' comp, 13 million compared to 6.5 million. As a board member, I'd want to dive into that to understand it more. And if true, explore where there may be similar examples in other places of the budget. I'd want to ensure the budget is as streamlined and thoughtful as we can make it, so we are maximizing dollars for students, classrooms, and school sites.
Okay, next question. Will you commit to rejecting donations and support from privatization-linked organizations such as Go Public Schools and the California Charter School Association?
Yes. You don't need to put the timer on, that's all. Yes.
All right. Thank you. Our next question. What is the role of the school board? What is the role of an individual school board director? And what should be the relationship between the board and the superintendent?
Yeah, thank you. As I think you all know, there's currently a vacancy in D6. So I put this in my application for the vacancy as well. But first and foremost, the board's responsibility is to protect the sanctity of public education in Oakland and ensure that every student gets a high quality education. In order to do that, our district needs a fiscally responsible and solvent budget. More specifically, as we dive in, at the highest level, the board is tasked with setting goals and strategy for student achievement and policies consistent with those goals, adopting curriculum and monitoring student performance, ensuring a fiscally responsible and solvent budget, advocating for students at the local, state, and federal level, hiring, supporting, evaluating, and ultimately firing, if necessary, the superintendent and the general counsel, and evaluating the board's own effectiveness. What's not in specific board policy, though, is just as important is how those things occur. Apologies. The board and the district as a whole have an opportunity to increase transparency and work in partnership with the community to ultimately increase trust that has been broken. It is on the individual board members to work with others to ensure that that occurs. The superintendent at the highest level is responsible and accountable for implementing what the board sets, the vision, goals, policy, and decisions. Essentially, the board helps guide and direct the superintendent, and the superintendent and her team is the one that makes it happen.
Okay, thank you. Next, do you commit to voting against any school closures? Other than school closures, what are 3 specific ways you can respond to possible funding shortfalls in the budget?
Thank you. My commitment is to our students first, foremost, and last. My commitment is to ensuring that when I leave the board, we have a more stable, long-term budget in place that will serve Oakland Public School students and can build on what we have so we can become a model across the country. We have to think about how to be the most efficient and effective with our dollars. Part of the challenge with what just happened is that the process used to have this conversation was not transparent, was not inclusive. We know we're not always going to make everybody happy, but I commit to an open, transparent, and inclusive process. My guiding bar will always be, how do we continue to build a stronger, stable budget so that we can better serve Oakland students? I hope deeply that we never have to lose another school, but I cannot commit that we will never close another school. Some specific ways to potentially respond to budget shortfalls include not using one-time dollars for ongoing funds. While we are in an okay place for this year, we might not be in a budget deficit because of one-time surpluses at the state level that we've been able to pull down. We are in a structural deficit with rising costs like pension and declining enrollment. I gave the example of the workers' comp earlier and kind of exploring if there are other examples like that. Related is diving deeper into the proportion of dollars going to consultants in central office versus to school sites, classrooms, and kids. And then lastly, as a third example, I would really work to advocate and partner with leaders at the state for more funding from the state level and changes in funding, like AB 1614, championed by our own Assembly member Mia Bonta, which increases overall base funding. And I would also work to forgive the debt owed to the state.
Thank you. Our next question is, what do you see as the effects of charter schools on OUSD students? And what do you believe should be the relationship between OUSD and the charter sector?
Yeah. Public education should be able to provide an adequate education for every student. We need to resolve a situation where public education is just getting leftovers. Too often we are getting the resources and energy that is left. At the same time, I want to acknowledge that 30% of our Oakland students choose to attend charter schools, so there must be something attractive there. Asking parents to send their children to our public schools when they believe they're getting access to a better education at a charter school is clearly not a successful strategy. So we as public school advocates need to create an education system that is attractive to parents who want the best for their kids. It's also critical to acknowledge this idea that parallel structures with the same goal end up undermining the system overall and pitting themselves against each other. That's what we see happening here in Oakland with charter schools, where dollars are siphoned, resources are siphoned out of public education. We constantly talk about losing dollars, but we don't talk about the things beyond just money. We lose facilities, we lose students, we lose parent activity engagement that we know impact outcomes. It's really a both and, right? The district needs to make it more attractive to families, and the county, the state, and other government systems need to make it so that districts are actually able to do that and help ensure that everybody plays by the same rules.
Okay, thank you. Could you describe some examples and sources of environmental racism in your district and say how they have affected OUSD students, parents, and educators? What commitments can you make toward combating the disproportionate impacts of pollutant exposure on OUSD students, parents, and educators?
Thank you. This one is deeply personal to me for a number of reasons, but there's one very top of mind. My uncle, one of my dad's brothers that I talked about at the beginning, just yesterday passed away. 2.5 weeks ago, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He and my dad would jokingly call each other Bobo. He'd always have the biggest smile on his face. And he was someone who, from a young age, dealt with diabetes for most of his life. I recently learned that there's a very clear connection between pancreatic cancer and diabetes. And we know the connections between air pollution, walkability, green space, and so many other factors that lead to diabetes and other conditions that so many of our kids experience here in Oakland. Systems of oppression and the policies that result, I apologize. Systems of oppression and the policies that result, like redlining, the opposite, redlining, mean that 45 million Americans are breathing dirtier air. Those 45 million Americans are unsurprisingly most often, like my uncle, in communities of color in lower income communities. Here in Oakland, one of the many policies that impact our students, parents, and educators is the 70-year-old truck ban on 580. That essentially means we're putting all of the fuel emissions, all of the pollution from trucks and other diesel-powered vehicles onto the 880, onto our flatlands in East Oakland. There's also a huge number of industrial factories here in East Oakland that release cancer-causing chemicals. One, for example, is the ABNI foundry near the Coliseum that is still here, but will be moving at some point to Texas. I'm grateful for students, for the students at CCPA, Life, and other schools who have been really working to raise awareness on this, on soil, contaminants, all of this stuff, but we can't just stop at awareness. We must take action. I would love to work with those students and others to advocate for changes at the local, state, and federal level, and also draw down funds so that we can address past harm. And I have the experience of having done that advocacy and partnership work for the last 6 years in the mayor's office with Oakland community members.
Thank you. Our next question is, how would you partner with Oakland community? That includes students, families, educators, classified staff, unions, community organizations, etc., around issues facing our schools, in particular when making controversial or difficult decisions?
Yeah, great question. Love the very comprehensive list and the et cetera at the end in case there are others in there. This is a great question because this is a great way to review how school closures were just done. While the outcome may have been the same, we don't know. The process by which the board used to make this decision could have contributed to a sense of trust rather than a sense of distrust. Let's be clear, the board knew very early on that there was a problem and for whatever reason was not fully transparent about it. This would have been a great opportunity to engage families, teachers, the full list that you named, community, in the options for solving and addressing it. Had we done this earlier when there was time, there would have been time to have that engagement and thoughtful conversations. Instead, we waited until it was far too late And families, teachers, again, that full list, were steamrolled. What could have been an opportunity to bring everyone together, transparently share and ensure folks understand the numbers where we're at and explain what the runway looked like was instead an opaque, confusing, and speedy process where most folks were excluded. Rather than increase the levels of distrust, the board could have used this as an opportunity to build trust. Again, I can't say if the outcomes would have changed or been the same since I wasn't a part of it, but I do know that the relationship between the board and the community would be very different right now. This is bigger than school closures though. This is about equity. As a board member, I will ensure that I lead with respect, transparency, and integrity when partnering with students, families, educators, and again, everyone else on that list.
Okay, thank you. And last, would you like to add any closing remarks?
Yeah. First, I know I said this before recording, but just thank you so much for your time and everyone else who's watching this. I would be incredibly honored to serve as the District 6 school board member. I truly believe the challenges that Oakland faces are challenges currently being faced by almost every school district in California, certainly if not the country. And if they're not yet facing them, they will be very soon. We are at a historic moment. We have the opportunity to become the model for how to make these decisions and get through the difficult moment that we are in now. None of this will be easy. It will take a ton of intentionality and effort, and I believe we can do it. If anyone can, it's Oakland. And I know it hasn't been easy so far either. It's not been easy for the board, not been easy for OEA, not for students, not for parents. And let's be clear, there are still tough times ahead, but I believe the building blocks are here for us to become that model. I would love to be a part of that and be a part of creating a system that not only provides an equitable education for every student here in Oakland, but can show a pathway for other school districts to follow.